salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. In the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful. I really thought that there would be a bigger turnout than this. You guys are really disappointed. We'll have to do better next time. Of course, the introduction in relation to Sami al-Hajj was every time the brother said Sami, I started laughing because it's not Sami sitting there, it's Omar Dagayas. And for those of you who don't know who Omar Dagayas is, he was held in Guantanamo Bay for 6 years. He was a resident of Brighton, and the Brighton Save the Omar campaigned for him ardently for many, many years, and eventually they saw the reality and the manifestation of the campaign in his release. So he was released and returned to Brighton. Sami, on the other hand, as you may or may not know, was an Al Jazeera cameraman who'd been held by the United States of America in Guantanamo Bay for 6 years plus. Upon his release, or shortly after his release, I contacted him so that he could join us in this tour with myself and with Chris, who you'll hear from when we converse with one another after Omar speaks. And Sami's case is particularly relevant because despite him being held without charge or without trial for all of these years, within weeks or within months of his return, he took up his job as a journalist for Al Jazeera again and attempted to, on a ship aptly named the Dignity, cross the waters into Gaza. His ship was rammed by an Israeli gunboat and was terribly damaged. He was unable to make it there. But he wasn't able to make it to the United Kingdom because of the restrictions that he faced in entering the country with the visa problems. But before I begin talking about Guantanamo Bay and what we're hearing today in the news, it's important to remember that whilst we are here talking about torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, how can that compare when we're seeing people, or have seen people for the past few weeks, being killed mercilessly in the streets of Gaza? And one of the detainees, the former detainees from Guantanamo Bay, was with us last week, and his name is Jarallah al-Marri, a Qatari resident and national. And he had been in prison in Guantanamo for 7 years. He had never seen his youngest child until he was released, a 7-year-old. And even despite him having just been released from Guantanamo, he often got up and spoke and said, how can I speak about my case? And how can I speak about what happened to me when we see what's taking place in the streets of Gaza? Until we stop what's taking place in Gaza, only then can we start to address the issues of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And today, the issue that's at hand is that Obama has said, and you may all have heard, it's the front news, it's on the front pages of all of the websites, it's on all of the television stations, that Obama has said that he will suspend the military commissions process and that he will eventually close down Guantanamo Bay. And there's been this huge euphoria. Obama, his first act of his presidency is to address Guantanamo Bay. So it's as if we have to recognize, it's as if we have to accept that somebody stuck a knife in our backs, 9 inches deep. They pulled it back 3 inches and said, now we're making progress. But the reality is that Guantanamo was illegal to begin with. As a detention facility, holding people without charge or trial amounts to false imprisonment. It amounts to kidnap and torture and abduction. So when he says that I will begin a suspension of the military commissions process, a process that everyone, every normal legal mind around the world has said is a kangaroo court, it's a mockery of justice, for him to say that I will suspend it just for a few months is not enough. It's too little, too late. Most of the people in Guantanamo Bay are not charged, even according to the standards of the kangaroo court that is the military commissions process. About 10 to 15 people. Amongst the most common people, amongst the most well-known people that have been convicted of any crime is Osama bin Laden's driver. That's it. And this is why they told us they would launch the war on terror, to catch Osama's driver, who for $200 a month would ferry Osama and other people around from place to place. Is that it? I mean, does anybody remember Hitler's driver? And that's the reality of where we are at. They're talking about a process that doesn't affect the majority of the people held in Guantanamo Bay. The majority of the people there should and can be released to their home countries from where they originate, and at least then they can go back home to meet those children that they have never seen, or those children that are now 7 years older than they ever were before, and also to go in some cases to pray along, or to make supplication and pray alongside the graves of the people, which include their mothers and fathers and relatives who died waiting for them to return from Guantanamo. That's the reality of what 7 years of incarceration does for a person. That's what happens when you remove a person's ability to communicate meaningfully with any of their family members, to know what it is, what crime it is that they've committed for which they're paying the ultimate price, which is their freedom. And one of the things that I told Chris, and we used to speak to Chris about over the period of our touring, and it's been quite an amazing tour around the country, is that, Chris, didn't you think it was odd to find that this war that we're having to endure, which was aptly named Operation Enduring Freedom, that you'll see outside every camp in Guantanamo there is a plaque, and the plaque says, "Honor bound to defend freedom." And behind these plaques in every camp is a man or men in cages that measure 8 foot by 6 foot, in which it is impossible to take more than 3 steps in either direction. A place where the iguana is protected under the Endangered Species Act, but the human being, the detainee who wears an orange suit, has no protections, has no rights. Isn't that bizarre? And of course, Chris will answer that later on when we speak together. But of course, the greatest picture, the greatest issue about Guantanamo isn't that there's this detention camp and everybody knows about it and people wear orange suits and yes, they've been tortured in some cases and so forth. The issue at hand is that the most powerful leaders on earth, including the ones that we have in this country, have justified and legislated and forced through measures that allow the detention of people without charge or trial. Whether it's in the secret detention sites where people have disappeared, whether it's in Bagram, where I was held for a year and was looking forward to going to Guantanamo by the time I'd gone through this process, whether it's in Guantanamo or whether it's here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, where people are held without charge or trial in the prisons of Belmarsh, Woodhill, Long Lartin, Durham, and Full Sutton. That's the common thread, that's the common denominator. That in the war on terror we can demonize people so much that we can remove their basic, rudimentary, fundamental rights. And that is the right of habeas corpus. And Britain has said quite clearly and categorically throughout the world that we have an ancient civilization of people that have exported a concept of freedom and justice and liberty to the rest of the world. That's why you can go in Pakistan to this day and file for a habeas corpus writ for somebody who's been detained without charge or trial. That came from Britain. And it's enshrined in the Magna Carta, that big, great writ, which says, this is what Britishness is about. And yet in the 21st century, in the United Kingdom, in America, indeed in Europe, and even in places like Pakistan that have now followed suit, people disappear en masse. People get extraordinarily rendered. People get taken away in front of their wives and children sometimes at gunpoint, like what happened with me. People get dragged off to some of the world's most notorious prisons and have to pass through, before they get there, some of the world's most torturous prisons. If you look at some of the cases of the people that are held, like Binyam Mohammed, who is a British resident, who is still in Guantanamo Bay. He was rendered from Pakistan to Morocco. And in Morocco, under the auspices of the United States Military Intelligence, he was tortured by Moroccan intelligence, which included a razor blade being taken to his genitalia. And he remains there. If you look at the case of Omar Khadr, the only remaining Guantanamo Bay detainee who was a Westerner. He was brought into custody when I first saw him as a 14-year-old who had lost his eye, who had two huge exit wounds from a shotgun that was blasted at his back, and his body